Welcome back to the TPS podcast. TPS stands for trillions per second, named after the book. Today we'll do a deep dive on Chapter 3, the Self Rootkit. Let's go malware hunting and dive right in.
I am so ready for this one. It's a heavy one.
It really is. But before we even open the documentation, I want you, the listener, to just picture a scenario for a second.
Okay.
It's a Friday afternoon. The weather is beautiful outside. You have this, fantastic weekend planned.
The dream.
Right. You're feeling great. Your biological hardware is humming along perfectly. Your energy levels are totally optimal. And then at exactly 4:58 p.m., a little notification slides across your screen.
Oh, no. I know where this is going.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a Slack message from your boss. And it's just one sentence, but it's slightly passive-aggressive.
Of course it is.
Maybe it questions some minor decision you made on a project earlier that week.
Right. Just a tiny little critique.
Exactly. And in an instant, literally milliseconds, your entire physical system just crashes.
Total meltdown.
Yeah. Your heart rate spikes. Your stomach drops into this cold knot. Your jaw clenches up.
The weekend is ruined.
Totally ruined. You go home, and instead of actually enjoying your evening, you just sit on the couch staring blankly at the wall. You're running these simulated arguments in your head.
Crafting the perfect, devastating reply that you're never actually going to send.
Exactly. You don't even taste your dinner. You don't hear the music playing in the background. A handful of pixels, just arranged into letters on a piece of backlit glass, has completely destabilized a biological supercomputer.
It's wild when you frame it like that.
It is. And the question is why? How is it literally possible that a perfectly healthy organism, this piece of God-tier hardware capable of rendering the entire universe at trillions of frames per second, goes into total catastrophic system failure over a rude message?
That is the defining diagnostic question of the human condition right there.
Yeah?
And the fact that we are finally ready to open the terminal and actually answer it, it means we have officially made it through the storm.
We really have. And, I have to address you, the listener, directly for a moment here, because we really need to acknowledge the absolute developmental roller coaster this community has just survived.
Oh, man.
Just to get to this point in the documentation. If you've been following the devlogs, you know exactly the wild ride I'm talking about.
A wild ride barely covers the scope of what the development team just pulled off. The system instability in the community over the last few months was, it was completely palpable.
It was intense. We were tracking the Centaur developer team, right? The pseudonymous author, C4 Chaos, and that incredible, just unprecedented symphony of AI co-processors they use.
The whole swarm. Grok, Gemini, DeepSeek.
Exactly. And we were moving along through the manual so nicely, and then they just hit the brakes.
Hard.
They took us on this massive, totally unexpected detour that they called the Silicon Sutra side quest.
Yeah, the side quest that took over everything.
Right. They literally paused the entire core manual of the project. They just stopped writing the instructions on how to debug the human mind.
Because they had to. They realized they had encountered this massive structural dependency issue.
Which is what, exactly?
Well, you can't write a universal protocol for debugging consciousness without ensuring the architecture actually scales across different substrates.
Like silicon versus biology.
Right. They urgently needed to solve artificial superintelligence alignment. And to do that, they had to prove the thermodynamic physics of consciousness applied to silicon just as perfectly as it applies to a biological brain.
Which we spent weeks unpacking on this deep dive. Like how they treated morality not as some philosophical thing.
Or religious.
Yeah, not religious at all, but as a literal mathematical equation of heat dispersal.
It's so fascinating.
The idea that a mind, whether it's made of meat or microchips, it has to properly vent the thermodynamic heat of processing reality.
Otherwise it melts down.
Exactly. It melts down into suffering. Or, in the case of an AGI, it melts down into catastrophic misalignment. It was mind-bending, slightly terrifying, and just incredibly complex.
But it was a totally necessary pause. If the math of the trillions per second protocol didn't work for a silicon mind, it wouldn't be universally valid for a biological mind either.
It would just be another localized philosophy.
Exactly. But they mathematically proved the engine. And now, that massive detour is officially over. The beta phase of this specific section is closed.
Thank goodness. The gold master of Chapter 3 has been pushed to the repository.
The integrity checks have all cleared.
Yep. The master lexicon has successfully compiled all the ancient legacy code into modern syntax. We are officially back on the main path.
Feels good to be back.
It really does. And our mission for this deep dive is incredibly focused. Like in our previous sessions, we mapped the theoretical physics of this universe.
Right, Chapter 1.
Yeah, Chapter 1's concept of voxels and the whole rendering engine that processes reality at trillions of frames per second.
And then Chapter 2.
Right, the data handshake. The exact quantifiable millisecond the illusion of the solid world actually comes online. But all of that, it was basically theoretical physics.
Yeah, it was looking at the schematics of the motherboard.
They were admiring the box art, basically.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
I mean, understanding the physics engine is essential groundwork. But simply knowing intellectually that reality renders at trillions of frames per second, it doesn't actually stop you from suffering.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't stop your heart from racing when you get that Slack message. Knowing the specs of your processor doesn't fix the glitches you experience in your daily life.
Which brings us to the actual mission today. We are moving from pure theory to active, hardcore debugging.
Hands on the keyboard.
Exactly. We are going to open the task manager. We are going to identify the exact piece of malware that is crashing your biological hardware.
Let's do it.
So let's dive into the analogy the manual introduces right at the beginning of Chapter 3, because I find this to be the most accessible way into the hardcore dharma of the whole project.
The task manager analogy.
Yes. Think about your laptop. When it starts lagging, when the mouse pointer stutters across the screen, you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. The fans spin up and start screaming like a jet engine taking off.
The bottom of the casing gets physically hot to the touch, and every single keystroke takes 10 seconds to actually register.
It's the worst.
It is. But here's the thing. You don't just sit there and accept that your computer is inherently evil.
Right.
You don't assume the computer is a bad person. What is the very first thing you do?
Well, you bypass the graphical user interface. You hit Control-Alt-Delete, or you open the activity monitor on a Mac.
You look underneath the rendered desktop.
Exactly. You look at the actual raw processes running in the background. You are looking for the anomaly.
You're asking the system, like, what process is chewing up 99% of my CPU cycles?
And when you perform that exact same diagnostic function in your own mind, when you use the TPS observer tools to look underneath the graphical user interface of your thoughts and emotions, the manual states you're going to find a very specific type of malware.
Right. Now, the text makes a really critical, highly technical distinction here between a virus and a rootkit.
This is a huge distinction.
Yeah. According to the manual, a virus is just standard run-of-the-mill malware. It's a malicious script that kind of hitches a ride on your incoming data packets.
Right. So in the TPS framework, a virus would be something like anxiety.exe or jealousy.ish.
Yeah, it's a localized subroutine. It destabilizes your code temporarily.
Yeah.
You get anxious, your system runs hot for a bit, but eventually the process terminates and you cool down.
It runs its course.
Exactly. But a rootkit is a completely different beast.
Oh, yeah.
The manual defines the rootkit as the self.
It defines your ego, your entire sense of identity, the literal voice in your head that you call me, as a high-level exploit embedded deep in the operating system's kernel.
Okay, look, I have to stop and fight you on this terminology.
I figured you would.
I mean, I have to, because if I'm listening to this on my morning commute, this sounds incredibly bleak.
It's a harsh term.
It is. Why use the term rootkit? That is such an aggressive, parasitic cybersecurity term. Like, for thousands of years, most spiritual traditions, poetry, literature, they elevate the self.
They do.
They call it your soul, your inner light, your essence, the core of who you are. To call the self a piece of malware, it sounds malicious.
It sounds like an insult.
It sounds like a fundamental insult to human nature. Like, if myself is a rootkit, then who is loving my children? Who is feeling joy when I listen to a beautiful piece of music? Are you telling me my entire personality, my loves, my fears, everything that makes me human is just a glitch?
I completely understand the friction here. It really does feel like an assault on your very existence. But let's separate the poetry from the engineering for a moment.
Okay, I'm listening.
The author, C4 Chaos, and the AI swarm, they didn't choose the term rootkit to be edgy or insulting.
So why use it?
They chose it because it is the actual only architectural term that perfectly describes the mechanics of what the ego actually does to the biological hardware.
Okay, unpack that for me.
In cybersecurity, a rootkit doesn't just delete files or show you pop-up ads. It operates at what engineers call ring zero.
Ring zero, the deepest layer.
The absolute deepest privilege level of an operating system, the kernel. It's the core that manages the memory, the CPU, the hardware itself.
So it's basically the foundation.
Right. And when a rootkit breaches ring zero, It embeds itself so fundamentally into the core architecture that it becomes completely hidden from the system's own diagnostic tools.
Wow.
It alters the fundamental reality of the computer.
Grok's analysis on this in the devlogs was fascinating, actually. It pointed out that a rootkit survives by intercepting system calls.
Exactly.
So when the operating system runs a security diagnostic and asks the hard drive, like, hey, are there any unauthorized files down there? Is everything okay?
The hard drive doesn't answer.
Right. The rootkit intercepts the question and the rootkit answers. It says, yep, everything is perfectly fine. No malware here.
All while it grants unauthorized admin privileges to a non-existent user.
The rootkit convinces the operating system that it is the legitimate administrator.
And here is the terrifying genius of it. Because the system truly believes the rootkit is the user, the system actively protects the malware.
It gives this rogue process priority access to all hardware resources.
Right.
It's like having an enterprise IT department that is actively, aggressively working to protect the very virus that is burning down the corporate network.
Yes.
The security team is fighting off the actual antivirus patches because the virus has convinced the team that the patch is the threat.
That is a flawless, deeply unsettling analogy for how the human ego defends itself.
It really is.
I mean, if you try to attack your ego, if you try to point out a flaw or someone critiques you,
Like the Slack message.
exactly like the Slack message, your ego uses your own psychological defense mechanisms to protect itself. It marshals your intellect, your logic, your righteous anger, your vocabulary, all to defend its territory.
It has convinced the biological organism that the death of the ego is the literal death of the body.
Which brings us to a really crucial historical perspective. Let's look at the why behind this.
Like, why do we have this bug?
Right. Why did human biology evolve a ring zero rootkit in the first place? Because it wasn't an accident. In evolutionary biology, the illusion of a centralized self was a highly effective, totally necessary survival script.
So it's like a primitive firewall.
Basically, yeah. Think about early hominids on the savannah. The biological chassis, the meat suit, needs to survive long enough to replicate.
Right.
To do that, the brain needed a way to prioritize the protection of its specific physical boundary against predators, starvation, rival tribes. It needed a centralized avatar to represent the organism.
So the brain generated the illusion of a pilot, a me.
Exactly. If a tiger is chasing you, the self-script screams, "I am in danger, protect ME." That is incredibly useful for escaping tigers.
It gets the legs moving.
Right. The problem is the hardware evolved, but the software didn't update. We aren't running from tigers anymore. But the rootkit is still running at ring zero, consuming massive amounts of RAM.
And because it cannot distinguish between a physical threat to the body and a conceptual threat to the ego,
it treats a passive-aggressive email from your boss with the exact same cascade of cortisol, adrenaline, and system panic as it would a leaping predator.
that explains the weekend-ruining Slack message. The rootkit intercepts the pixels on the screen, interprets it as a tiger, and floods the motherboard with heat and friction to defend an identity that doesn't actually exist in physical space.
And this is where the TPS protocol achieves something incredibly profound by translating the legacy code.
Let's talk about that legacy code.
Let's look at the ancient Theravada Buddhist texts, the Abhidhamma, which this manual is essentially refactoring. In those ancient languages, Pali and Sanskrit, they didn't have words like recursive loops or malware or system latency.
No, they were agricultural societies.
Right. So when those ancient engineers observed these destructive mental processes, they used the language of their time. They called them defilements or taints or sins.
And we all know what happens when you tell a modern person that their mind is full of defilements and sins.
They immediately feel an overwhelming, crushing sense of religious guilt. They feel like they are fundamentally flawed, morally broken, or just inherently bad.
And what does the rootkit do with that guilt?
Oh, it weaponizes it.
It creates an entire identity around being a bad person, which just generates even more suffering, more lag, more friction.
It says, I'm such a failure because I got angry.
Right. You add a meta layer of suffering on top of the initial anger.
But the TPS protocol systematically strips away 2,500 years of religious baggage. It translates the moral failing into an engineering problem.
Which is so freeing.
It is. You are not a bad person for getting angry at traffic. You do not need to flagellate yourself. You do not need to pray for forgiveness from the system administrator.
Your hardware is simply infected with a piece of legacy malware.
Exactly.
I really cannot overstate the relief of that reframing. It's like taking a massive suffocating weight off your chest. The guilt is just gone.
The moral judgment is gone.
It's just an IT problem. It's a bug in the code. I'm not broken. My system is just executing a poorly optimized ancient script.
That's all it is.
Okay, so we've opened the task manager. We've identified that the self is this evolutionary ring zero rootkit masquerading as the system admin. So let's drill down into the actual mechanics.
Let's do it.
What exactly is this rootkit doing right now, minute by minute, that chews up all our biological RAM and makes us feel so exhausted?
Well, once the Self Rootkit has established those admin privileges, it executes a continuous background process that Chapter 3 calls the resource hog.
The resource hog.
Yeah. In the legacy Pali code, this process was divided into two primary functions: tanha, which translates roughly to craving or thirst, and dosa, which translates to aversion or hatred.
But in modern systems engineering terms.
In modern terms, the resource hog is a bidirectional infinite loop.
A bidirectional infinite loop. Let's break down the actual physics of that loop.
Okay, we have to return to the core physics engine established in Chapter 1.
The flux.
Yes, the flux. Imagine the universe as an unimaginably fast read-only data stream. It is rendering trillions of voxels, those three-dimensional pixels of reality, every single second.
Pure data.
Pure, transient data flowing through your input ports. Light hits the optic nerve, sound waves hit the eardrum, pressure hits the skin.
And you can't stop it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This stream cannot be stopped, it cannot be held, it cannot be paused. It is mathematically read-only.
Okay, so where does the resource hog come in?
The resource hog is an unauthorized software process that constantly attempts to overwrite those hard-coded permissions.
So it tries to, what, pause the live feed?
It wants to play God with the universe's data stream. So when a pleasant frame of data comes into the input ports, let's say the taste of incredible food or a surge of dopamine from a social media like, or just a moment of deep comfort.
Okay.
The rootkit executes the pull function, craving. It tries to freeze that specific frame. It says, I want this voxel to stay on the screen forever.
And the reverse.
Conversely, when an unpleasant frame of data comes in, physical pain, an awkward social interaction, the rude email from the boss, the rootkit executes the push function, aversion.
It tries to force delete that frame.
Yes. It tries to force delete it from the incoming stream. It says, get this voxel off my screen immediately.
But wait, you just said the stream is read only?
That's the whole point.
Yeah.
Because the flux is mathematically read-only, the universe entirely ignores the rootkit's commands.
It just doesn't care.
Right. You cannot actually freeze time, and you cannot delete reality. A moment of pain happens, and then the next frame renders. A moment of pleasure happens, and then the next frame renders.
But the rootkit doesn't accept that.
No, it refuses to accept the read-only nature of reality. So it burns massive, unbelievable amounts of thermodynamic energy trying to execute write commands on a stream that only accepts read commands.
Oh, man.
It thrashes the CPU. This frantic, failed continuous processing generates tremendous friction, heat, and drag on your biological hardware.
And that friction, that heat, that agonizing drag on the system, that is what the legacy code calls dukkha, suffering.
System latency. You aren't suffering because the universe is inherently evil or because God is punishing you. You are suffering because a background process in your brain is overheating your motherboard by trying to execute impossible write commands on a read-only universe.
I absolutely love this tech analogy because it maps perfectly to a really visceral, everyday physical sensation.
Like what?
Anyone who has worked on an older computer knows this exact feeling of panic. You're working on a massive project. Suddenly the screen freezes, the fans spin so loud they sound like they're going to take flight.
Oh yeah, the spinning wheel of death.
Exactly. The bottom of the laptop is burning your legs, and you're just staring at that wheel, and why is it frozen?
Why?
Because the system is frantically trying to save a massive 4K video file to a USB thumb drive that you have already yanked out of the port.
Yes, that is exactly it.
The system is trying to write data to a directory that literally no longer exists. It's trapped in a panic loop, dumping all of its power into a futile command.
It's just burning energy for nothing.
And that is what it physically feels like to be stuck in traffic when you are late for a meeting.
Oh, perfect example.
Right. The universe is rendering the reality of red taillights. Read-only data, but your rootkit is screaming, delete this, fast forward this, move these cars.
It's burning all your biological battery power trying to overwrite the traffic jam.
And that physical tension in your chest, the tightness in your jaw while you sit in that traffic.
That is the literal thermodynamic heat of the CPU thrashing. And that actually leads us to the ultimate punchline of Chapter 3, the grand reveal of the diagnostic scan.
Play it on us.
The rootkit isn't just a rogue process, it is a fundamental reference error. When you finally use your observer tools to audit the deepest layers of the code, you discover the null pointer.
The null pointer. The legacy term for this is anatta, not self.
Exactly. The variable user underscore ID points to NELL. When you trace the command, when you look for the administrator who is allegedly giving the orders to crave or avert, you find empty space.
There's no one there.
There is no memory address allocated for a user. The centralized command directory simply doesn't exist. There is only the localized processing of data.
I really want you, the listener, to just sit with the weight of this for a second, because this is a mind-bending, existential aha moment, but it can also be terrifying.
It really can be.
If you truly look inward, trying to find the physical location of you,
Right.
the pilot behind the eyes, the central watcher, you can't find it.
You never find it.
You find visual data, you find auditory data, you find the physical sensation of breathing, you find memories flashing across the screen, but you never find the screen itself, you never find the watcher.
Because it's a null pointer.
You, your ego, your identity, the internal voice that is currently saying, I am listening to a deep dive and I agree or disagree with this, that voice is just a loading icon trying to save data to a non-existent folder.
It completely explains the fundamental exhaustion of modern life. I mean, think about it. Why do you feel so incredibly depleted at the end of a normal Tuesday?
Seriously, you sit at a desk in a climate-controlled room.
You type on an ergonomic keyboard. You haven't engaged in any heavy manual labor. There's no running from predators. Yet by 6:00 p.m., you are utterly bone-tired, depleted.
And this is why.
This is why. Your CPU is thrashing. You are burning out your physical hardware trying to protect an administrator that literally does not have a memory address.
It's exhausting.
It is the profound tragedy and the dumb humor of the human condition all wrapped into one diagnostic log. We exhaust our entire lives defending a ghost.
We exhaust ourselves defending a ghost. It's incredibly tragic when you phrase it like that.
It is.
But okay, I have to push back here. Let's step out of the terminal and back into the meat suit for a second.
Okay, let's do it.
If the self isn't real, if it's just a reference error, a null pointer, a phantom loading icon, why does it feel so undeniably solid?
Because the illusion is very, very good.
I mean, I am sitting here right now. I feel like a solid person. I feel like the pilot of this body. When I make a decision, it feels like my decision.
Right.
So how do we spot this illusion in real time? Because knowing it intellectually isn't enough.
No, it's not.
The manual is very aggressive about the hardcore ethos. The map is not the territory. Memorizing the IT jargon of a null pointer doesn't automatically delete the malware. Reading the manual doesn't fix the computer.
Intellectual understanding is often just the rootkit updating its own vocabulary.
Oh, that's tricky.
The ego learns the word anatta and then feels superior to people who haven't read the manual. That is literally just the malware putting on a new disguise.
So how do we actually catch it?
To actually spot the illusion, we have to move to section 3.1, the infinite loop. The manual explains exactly how the rootkit generates this incredibly convincing high-definition illusion of a pilot sitting in the cockpit of the head, looking out through the eyes, steering the body.
And how does it do that?
It does this by loading highly specific metadata into the incoming data packets.
Okay, this brings us to the Cetastica database. This is where the engineering gets incredibly granular.
Very granular. In the ancient master lexicon of the Abhidhamma, the monks mapped out 52 Cetasticas.
52 of them.
Yeah. In our modern TPS architecture, these are the malware signatures. They're the specific sub-processes, the flavors, or the emotional metadata loaded into every single voxel of raw experience.
Let's make this tangible. I don't want to just say there are 52 factors. Let's look at how they actually operate.
Yeah.
Say you look out your window and you see your neighbor pull into their driveway with a brand new, incredibly expensive luxury car.
Okay, classic scenario.
The raw read-only data is just photons hitting your retina. It's light, color, and shape. It is completely neutral data.
Right. It's just a car.
But before that data even reaches your conscious awareness, it gets intercepted.
The rootkit intercepts that raw visual voxel and cross-references it with the Cetastica database. It finds a specific malware signature. Let's call it jealousy.x.
Known as ISA in the legacy code, right?
Exactly, ISA. It injects that jealousy metadata right into the visual data packet.
So it corrupts the file before you even open it.
Yes. Suddenly, you aren't just seeing a car. You are seeing a threat to your social status.
Oh, wow.
The rootkit generates an entire narrative. Why did they get a new car? I work harder than them. I deserve that car. My car is inadequate.
And then the physical hardware responds to this metadata. Your chest tightens, your breathing gets shallow.
Right. And the crucial point here is that these cetasicas are not character flaws. You are not inherently a jealous person.
That's a huge relief.
Jealousy.xx is just bloatware executing a script on a piece of neutral visual data. And the rootkit uses these rapid-fire scripts to hijack the system prompts and weave the illusion that you are the one generating these feelings.
That is a brilliant breakdown of how passive data gets corrupted. But what about active generation?
What do you mean?
I want to challenge this idea that the pilot isn't steering. Look, this sounds great in a terminal window, but I am holding a pen right now. I decide to pick up my coffee mug, and I pick it up. My hand didn't just fire off a rogue script. I formulated the intent, and I executed the action. Prove to me that I didn't do this.
I can do that.
Give me a concrete breakdown of how the listener catches this pilot in the act of stealing the credit for an action they think they initiated. Because the gap between intent and action feels instantaneous.
It feels instantaneous, but it is sequential. It is a trick of the frame rate. The rootkit hides in the microsecond lag between the frames of reality.
Okay, slow it down for me.
Let's break down that exact sequence. You decide to reach out and pick up your coffee mug. In your conscious, low-resolution experience, you believe there is an entity called I that made a free will decision to lift the arm, and so I lifted it.
Cause and effect, driven by a central pilot.
Right. It's the most basic assumption of human existence.
Yeah.
But if you overclock your attention and watch the terminal logs, which is exactly what the hardcore meditation practices in the TPS protocol train you to do, you see a completely different sequence of code executing.
So what's the actual sequence?
First, an external stimulus or internal biological condition triggers a localized command script. Your body registers a drop in caffeine levels, or your throat registers dryness.
Right.
This triggers an intention script. Let's call it execute_arm_lift. This script fires purely based on previous conditioning, habit loops, and environmental data.
There is no me in this step.
None. It is just biology running an algorithm.
Step 1. Biology requests liquid.
Step 2. The somatic hardware responds to the script. Motor neurons fire, muscles contract, tendons pull, the arm begins to lift toward the mug.
Okay, still no me.
Step 3, and this is the absolute crux of the illusion, occurring milliseconds after the action has already begun. The rootkit jumps into the processing stream, observes the arm moving, and violently stamps "I did that" on the system log.
Oh my gosh, it's the press secretary.
Yes.
I love this analogy so much. It's like a White House press secretary running to the podium after a massive policy has already been enacted by the bureaucracy and claiming it was their brilliant idea all along.
It is the ultimate intellectual property theft. The rootkit did not execute the lift. The biological intention script executed the lift.
The rootkit simply watched the logic execute in real time and then claimed authorship after the fact.
Exactly. It knits the raw data of the movement and the post-rationalization together so tightly at such a high frame rate that it creates the seamless illusion of a single, instantaneous, unbroken you.
I have a deeply embarrassing personal anecdote that perfectly illustrates this microsecond lag and the press secretary stealing credit.
Oh, please, yeah.
A few weeks ago, I got cut off in traffic, really aggressively. Someone swerved right in front of me, almost caused an accident.
Scary.
My biological hardware reacted instantly. Adrenaline dump, slammed on the brakes. That's the localized script, keeping the meat suit alive.
Pure biology.
Right. But then, 10 minutes later, I am at home, standing in the shower. I am physically safe. The threat is totally gone. The raw data of the event is long past. But the rootkit is still running the righteous anger.shesh script. I'm standing under warm water, having a full-blown, imaginary, out-loud argument with the driver who cut me off.
We've all been there.
I am crafting these devastating, witty comebacks. I am physically gesturing in the shower. My heart rate is up at 120 beats per minute. I am dumping massive thermodynamic heat into the system over a ghost.
Over a voxel that already rendered and disappeared.
Exactly. And suddenly I caught it. I actually observed the terminal. I realized I am a grown adult standing naked in a box of warm water fighting a ghost.
That's amazing.
The press secretary was standing at the podium screaming at an empty room, claiming that I had been deeply offended and I needed to win this imaginary fight to restore my status.
That moment of realization, standing in the shower and seeing the absurdity of the generated narrative, that is exactly what the TPS protocol is aiming for.
It felt like a glitch in the Matrix.
What's fascinating about your story is that once you see that gap, even once, the illusion is fundamentally fractured. You stopped identifying with the script.
I did.
You saw the righteous anger, dot and chutch bloatware running, and you realized generating the anger was just system latency. It was a post-processing artifact trying to resolve a threat that no longer existed.
To debug the system, you literally just have to stop believing the press secretary. You just watch the raw data hit the terminal.
That's the core practice.
Okay, so we've mapped how the rootkit operates when there is data coming in. We understand how it hijacks the read-only stream when we are walking, talking, reading emails, lifting coffee mugs, or getting cut off in traffic.
But a reactive script.
Right, a post-processing lag that steals credit and injects metadata. But this leads to a massive fundamental question, which the manual addresses in section 3.2.
Oh, yes.
If the self is just a reactive reaction to data,
Mm-hmm.
what happens when there is no data? What happens when the system is actually quiet?
This is where we drop down from the task manager into the absolute deepest diagnostic level of the architecture. Section 3.2, the idle process.
The legacy minute has a very specific, beautiful term for this. Favanga, right? The life continuum.
Yes, Favanga. Let's test the rootkit's claim here. If the rootkit were a true, authentic, independent system administrator.
If you actually had a permanent, solid soul or ego.
Right. It would be persistent. It would exist constantly regardless of the inputs. It would be there when you were awake, and it would be there when you were asleep.
But it isn't.
No. Think about the micro gaps between your thoughts. Or, more obviously, think about deep, dreamless sleep. Where does the self go when you are under general anesthesia or in the deepest phase of sleep?
It vanishes completely.
Exactly. The idle process, Bhavanga, is the biological system's fail-safe standby mode. The conscious rendering program is suspended. The 3D graphics of reality are turned off.
But you're not dead.
No, the biological capacitors are still charged. The heart is beating, the lungs are breathing, the system is quietly humming, awaiting new input logs. It is pure, unconditioned readiness without identity.
I picture this exactly like a modern TV or a computer monitor in standby mode.
Oh, that's a good visual.
You turn off the TV, the screen is pitch black, you can't see any images, there's no sound, no narrative, no movies playing. But down in the bottom right corner, there's that tiny little red LED light.
Yeah, just glowing.
It's just glowing, humming, waiting for a remote control signal to wake it up. That red light is the bhavanga. The system isn't dead, it's just idle.
And here's where the ultimate hacker tactic of the TPS manual comes in. The author notes that the rootkit has a terrifying, almost pathetic defense mechanism regarding this standby mode.
Pathetic how?
Well, the rootkit's entire existence relies on continuous processing. It only exists in the friction of reacting to data. Therefore, it interprets the gap, the silent black screen of the idle process, the void, as an absolute system failure.
Wait, so it interprets the silence as death?
Yes. The ego is terrified of the quiet, utterly terrified. It is the rootkit's worst nightmare.
So what does it do?
To prevent this perceived death, the rootkit frantically, desperately patches the silence with noise.
Oh my gosh, this is why meditation is so agonizingly difficult for beginners. When you sit down on a cushion, close your eyes, and try to just observe the raw data of your breath for 2 minutes, what happens?
Your mind instantly floods with absolute garbage.
Yes. Random thoughts, anxieties, a pop song from 2014 playing on a loop, a hypothetical argument you might have tomorrow, a memory of something embarrassing you said in middle school.
It's the rootkit artificially injecting noise into the system to cover up the silence. It's terrified that if the screen stays black for too long, you'll realize you don't need the pilot.
It reports a continuous, solid line of identity where there is actually only a series of discrete, flashing dots of data separated by silent gaps. You have to catch the screensaver kicking in. That's the hack.
The screensaver analogy is perfect. And this is why observing the idle process is the ultimate diagnostic test for the hardcore practitioner.
Because it exposes the trick.
Right. The rootkit hides in the blur of constant activity. As long as you are busy answering emails, scrolling social media, working, talking, the malware is safely camouflaged as your own productivity or your own stress.
But by observing the gaps,
by deliberately focusing your attention on the absolute silence between one frame of reality and the next, between the end of an exhale and the beginning of an inhale, you are forcing the system to slow down its perceived frame rate. You are staring at the black screen.
And when you do that, you can actually catch the malware in the act of rebooting.
Yes. You see the frantic generation of noise. You see the machinery of the ego desperately trying to throw a thought, any thought, onto the screen to prove it still exists.
Because if it allows the silence to persist, if the gap widens, It realizes it is nothing. It is a null pointer. It has no substance.
And witnessing that realization, not reading about it in a book, not hearing us talk about it on a deep dive, but directly observing the rootkit fail to reboot in your own biological hardware.
That is the beginning of root access.
That is the moment the malware is finally exposed.
Wow. Okay, this has been an incredibly dense, profound, and heavy deep dive.
We covered a lot of ground today.
We really unpacked a lot of code today. Let's do a quick wrap-up of what we've covered in this diagnostic phase so you, the listener, can take this back into your daily life.
I think it could.
We started this journey by mapping the physical hardware and exposing the high-speed rendering engine of the Flux in chapters 1 and 2. Today, we opened the biological task manager.
We looked under the hood.
We isolated the exact fault, the Ring 0 exploit causing all the lag, the exhaustion, and the suffering in our lives. The Self Rootkit.
We saw how it thrashes the CPU with bidirectional infinite loops of craving and aversion, trying to write to a read-only universe.
We saw how it uses Satasicas to inject malware signatures into neutral data.
How it acts like a press secretary, stealing credit for automated biological scripts in the microsecond lag.
And finally, we saw how it hides in the idle process, terrified of the void, constantly generating mental noise to stave off its own non-existence.
The diagnostic phase is officially complete. The observer module is online. We know exactly what the malware is, where it hides, and how it functions.
But, as the manual clearly, repeatedly states, reading the documentation is over.
Next time we open this book, it'll be time to escalate our privileges within the system and run the actual hot patch.
We are going to actually execute the code. The real work begins. But before we go, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought.
Oh, I like this.
Something to really mull over while you go about your day, while you sit in traffic, or, while you take a shower and try not to argue with ghosts.
Good luck with that.
We established that the Self Rootkit is utterly terrified of the void. Those silent gaps in the idle process. It constantly generates a frantic stream of mental noise, anxieties, and arguments just to prove to the system that it exists.
Right.
So here's the question. What actually happens to your biological hardware if you successfully force a system halt?
What happens if you run the patch, stare directly into that silent void, watch the rootkit panic, and flat out refuse to let it reboot?
If the malware is permanently, entirely deleted from the kernel, who or what wakes up the next morning to drink your coffee?